Welcome to the second semifinal round of the ninth International Mock Trial League competition. We are deeply proud of these two teams for making the semifinal. We have on the prosecution, team codename Blue, and on the defense, team codename Pursuit. Before we begin the round, let me talk a little bit about what International Mock Trial is. We are proud to be an entirely virtual, entirely free mock trial league. And that means that all rise in this league truly means all of us. If you're an 8th through 12th grader, we ask you, please talk to your coach about getting involved. Let's get into our judges because we have a great panel for you today. We're going to begin with introductions from Judge Joseph Lee.
All right. Hello. I'm Joseph. I'm currently a first-year competitor at UC San Diego's mock trial team, but I've been doing competitive mock trial for about cumulative total of 5 years now. And I'm really excited to judge this round because I used to also be an international mock trial competitor before I joined UCSD. I was studying abroad in high school in Korea, and so I remember those wonderful days where I would stay up until 3 a.m. to do mock trial competition online at Empire and stuff like that. And I'm really excited that you guys are also sharing that experience too of just being able to connect virtually with competitors from all over the world. And I'm just really excited to be a part of this and to judge and see the amazing talents you guys bring to the table.
Judge Jordan Katz.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan. I'm a current sophomore competitor at Vanderbilt on their mock trial team. This is my 6th year of being involved in high school. I did high school mock in Georgia, Gladiator, all the things. So, and I was able to judge 3 rounds of the preliminary rounds of this competition. So I'm really, really excited to see some high-level competition. Yeah, just super happy to have this opportunity to judge. Good luck.
Judge Joshua Zhang.
Hey folks, Joshua here. I'm currently a second year competitor at UC Santa Barbara. I have a long history going back to with IMT. I was here for the first competition. I think I've missed only one because of my amateur regionals, but I've been here every other competition, either competing or judging. I'm also one of the case writers for this case, so I look forward to seeing how everyone plays that out. Looking forward to it.
Judge Miles Rora.
Hi there, everyone. I am a current amateur competitor for the American Mock Trial Association. I compete on UCSB's team with my good friend and fellow judge, Joshua. Once upon a time, we sat on a prosecution bench together last year. I've judged a handful of rounds for this tournament. I presided on the other semifinals, and I'm really excited to see what you guys have to offer. Some pretty high-level high school mock trial that we get to see here, so I'm pretty excited. Good luck to everyone.
Judge Tom Wong.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tom. I'm a senior at MIT. I've been doing mock trial for 8 years. I think I was involved in the first ever IMT back then when I coached the teams that actually won the tournament. There were only 8 teams back then, if I remember correctly. We have grown quite a bit from there. It's my first time judging this case, but I've been involved in the past and really excited to see what the teams can do this round.
Our distinguished presider and coach of the reigning Gladiator, the #1 high school competitor in the world, Judge Janito Simon, our presider.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lambert. Janito Simon. I'm a criminal defense attorney in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I've been doing criminal defense for 12 years. But my mock trial goes back pretty deep and long as well. I started as a high school student, like most of you all, in 2006. I did a mock trial from 2006 to 2010 at FSU undergraduate. I did law school mock trial from 2010 to 2012 at FSU Law School. And currently now I coach a middle school team, William Dandy. I coach a high school team, Fort Lauderdale High School. I hope to help with the FSU undergraduate team, as well as I'm coaching the FSU Chester Bedell team, which is FSU Law School Chester Bedell team, which is a pretty big competition in Florida. Look forward to seeing and doing some good mock. Congratulations to both teams for making it this far.
At this point, All judges will turn cameras off with the exception of our presider, Judge Simon. Judge Simon, the floor is yours.
All right, let's get ready to rumble. I've got to go see Justice Brown Jackson at her art show today, or her show today. So, prosecution, are you ready to begin?
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution's ready to begin.
Defense, are you ready to begin?
Yes, Your Honor. Defense is ready to proceed.
All right, can I get appearances, please, prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Your Honor. My name is Logan Pham, and I, alongside my co-counsel, Olivia Hahn, represent the state of Tilly in today's case.
Good evening. Defense, appearances, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Your Honor. My name is James Joe, and today, alongside my co-counsel, Mr. Jiachen Chiu,
Good evening, Your Honor.
represent Jimmie Tanks in today's case.
Good evening. All right, before beginning, any housekeeping matters you'd like to address, prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor. We'd like to invoke Rule 603, the constructive swearing in of all witnesses.
All right, so invoke.
We would also like to invoke Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all witnesses, barring party representatives.
All right, defense, what say you?
No objections, Your Honor, to those rules.
Does defense have any exceptions? Will the defense be calling the actual party in this case, Mr. Jimmie Tanks?
No, Your Honor.
All right, so everybody's going to be presumed to be sequestered. Anything further, prosecution?
We would also like to make note of a stipulation. Stipulation number 5, that Harley Blaze had probable cause to arrest Jimmie Tanks on July 2nd, 2024, and that there were no violations of Jimmie Tanks' constitutional rights during and after his arrest.
Understood. Don't think we would have been at trial if probable cause wasn't determined. But defense? Oh, anything further, prosecution?
And Your Honor, seeing as we are in a virtual courtroom today, we're going to have to share our screens, and we would like to ask your preferences. Would Your Honor like us to ask permission or let the record reflect?
Just let the record reflect.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, defense, any housekeeping on your end?
Yes, Your Honor. One quick matter. Given the circumstance that this is our first time in your courtroom, when motioning to strike out a testimony, should we always ask for permission or should we assume that is stricken?
You all get paid the big bucks. You do your work. You move to strike if you want it stricken.
Of course, Your Honor.
Anything else, defense?
None, Your Honor. Defense is ready to proceed to opening statements.
All right. Prosecution, opening, please.
Yes, Your Honor. The fires of her hate set the house ablaze. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'd like to introduce to you Bertie Darrow. On July 1st, she woke up in a storm of fire, barely escaping with her life and having her house and her world burned down. And unfortunately, as you'll hear throughout this trial, this was no accident. This was a purposeful, meticulously planned out arson case, fueled by the defendant's fury and thirst for vengeance. You'll hear how things boiled over to death threats and prison time, and you'll hear just how much evidence there is stacked up that points to a knowing crime. How the defendant here today poured gasoline around Miss Birdie's house and then lit it ablaze. And you'll hear how it all ends with Mr. Tanks being caught red-handed with a barrel full of gasoline. You'll come to realize how Jimmie Tanks was willing to literally end the life of someone who had figuratively ended his. That is why the state is charging Jimmie Tanks with first-degree arson and attempted murder against Bertie Darrow. Now, members of the jury, what does that mean? It means that if we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Jimmie Tanks is the only reasonable explanation for the fire, you'll have no choice but to deem him as guilty. We are confident that we will meet this burden by showing you three key things: the motive, the fire, and the analysis. First, you'll hear that Jimmie had every reason to hate Bertie Darrow. You'll hear about how a hardworking, simple athlete had her every step tormented by bullies, one of them being the defendant here today. You'll hear about how Jimmie ruined her own life by stealing from a pawn shop, and how he blamed it all on Bertie. And then, of course, there's the science. You'll hear about how science on both sides pinned the cause of the fire on arson. You'll hear from Dr. Blaze how it's practically 100% confirmed how the fire started. It is proven even by the defense that the fire was willingly and purposely made. In other words, arson, spelled out in black on a scientific report. Ladies and gentlemen, at the conclusion of this trial, my co-counsel Olivia will come up here and ask that you charge Jimmie Tanks guilty of arson and attempted murder on an innocent person. The defense can try and say that these are coincidences, but members of the jury, over time, these coincidences add up. And ultimately, they point to Jimmie Tanks being the answer. We will prove how the fires of his hate set the house ablaze. And my co-counsel Olivia will come up here again and ask that you provide us with a verdict that delivers Miss Darrow the justice that she deserves. Today, you'll have the opportunity to deliver justice. And rendering a guilty verdict is a reaffirmation of our court of law and shows that horrific, vengeful actions will not go unanswered in today's society. Find him guilty. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel for defense. Counsel for prosecution. Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
May it please the court. He was framed with flame. Members of the jury, you just heard a story about Bertie Darrow, a woman whose life was ruined when my client Jimmie Tanks burned her house to ashes. But that story is wrong. Because members of the jury, you didn't hear about an insurance claim she took out exactly a month beforehand. You didn't hear about the mountain of debt that she found herself stuck in. And you didn't hear about any eyewitness testimony. In fact, the prosecution doesn't even have a suspect, not until Bertie Darrow pointed her fingers at Jimmie Tanks, my client. Members of the jury, it wasn't Mr. Tanks' hate that set the fire ablaze. It was Miss Darrow's frame that have clouded the truth. Today, the prosecution has charged my client with first-degree arson and attempted first-degree murder, and thus, they have to prove willingly Mr. Tanks set the fire to kill Miss Darrow and caused her serious bodily injuries. We as the defense don't have to prove anything today, and by stepping into this courtroom, the prosecution, they've taken upon the highest burden in our legal system, the burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that it was indeed Mr. Tanks that committed these crimes. But they won't be able to do that today because of three facts: the flame, the fraud, and the frame. First, the flame. You'll hear from Ms. Jordan Parks today that Bertie Darrow bought a little amount of paint, yet 2 huge cans of paint thinner. So huge, in fact, that you'll hear it's an absurd amount of paint thinner. The extra reports of Dr. Harley Blaze and Mr. Reynolds today will reveal the causes of the fire to be arson. Mr. Reynolds will testify that arson was caused by paint thinner. Second, the fraud. You'll learn today that Miss Darrow found herself neck deep in debt. She gambled, had over $200,000 of debt to be paid off. So when she received news that she inherited her great aunt's house, she formed a plan. To Miss Darrow, taking out an insurance and then burning the house to get the insurance money was a quick way to earn some cash. Finally, the frame. With a scheme so large, Bertie Darrow knew she would be investigated, so she pointed her fingers at my client Jimmie Tanks, the person that she bullied in high school, the person that she caught committing a crime, the perfect scapegoat to solve her financial issues. He was framed with Pham. Members of the jury, at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel Jiachen Chiu come up here and ask you to find Mr. Tanks not guilty of arson and attempted murder, because throughout this entire trial, I challenge you to find any piece of concrete, physical evidence that links Mr. Tanks to the scene of the crime, and you'll find that there won't be any. Find him not guilty.
Prosecution, please call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Bertie Darrow to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon, or good evening. Could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yeah, my name is Bertie Darrow.
And what do you do for a living, Miss Darrow?
I'm a basketball coach at Aberdeen High School. I work at Walmart on the side.
And how do you know Jimmie Tanks?
Yeah, Jimmie Tanks was a classmate in my year. They were the smartest kid in school, and they always inspired me to try harder.
Could you tell us more about what your relationship was like?
Well, it started when Jimmie showed the entire class my failing grade. I was really embarrassed and felt pretty bad about myself after. And then in chemistry, when Jimmie made a mistake on an experiment, the word dork just flew out.
So, did you dislike Tanks?
No, I didn't. I really regret being mean to Jimmie, though, because it ruined our relationship.
What do you mean?
Well, way back in high school, I think I felt like I had to keep being a jerk to them because I was popular for once, and I didn't want to be a nobody again, but if I could go back, I would have tried to be Jimmie's friend in chemistry that day.
Did you ever manage to become friends with him?
Unfortunately, that never happened. You see, I actually caught Jimmie stealing from Rick's pawn shop. I got it in a photo. Of course, I was conflicted. I mean, this was my classmate, but I knew I had to do the right thing, especially since Rick was struggling.
What did you do?
Well, I turned in the photos to the police. I felt I had to, but Jimmie definitely had some choice words to say to me after that. he actually threatened me.
What do you mean that he threatened you?
I'll never forget what he said that day. A few days after I went to the station, Jimmie found me. That crazed look in his eyes was terrifying. He looked straight at me and said, he said, "You're going to pay big time. When I get out, I'm going to kill you." That moment still haunts my sleep.
Did you ever see Jimmie Tanks again?
No, actually. After high school, I tried to forget about the incident. I got a new job that I loved, and I even moved into a new house.
Let's talk a little bit more about that house. Could you tell us about it?
Sure. I actually inherited it when my great aunt Alicia passed. She was like a mother to me, and it was really hard. I still think about her every day.
I'm so sorry for your loss. But when did you move into the house?
It was about mid-March. The paperwork was a pain, but I moved my stuff pretty easily. I grew up pretty poor, so I've never had lots of unnecessary furniture or objects in my home.
Did you ever consider selling the home?
No, it was one of the only things I had left from the best person I ever knew, and it meant everything to me, but I mean, I guess what happened to it hurt more, so yeah, I would have sold it if I knew it was gonna get destroyed.
Did anything happen to that house?
God, I wish nothing happened. It burned down July 1st. It burned down.
No, ma'am, I understand that this may be very difficult for you, so if you ever need a moment, just let me know. But what do you remember from that day, July 1st?
Well, the day was normal for the most part. I went grocery shopping, came home, and actually, I remember smelling a strong scent of gasoline. I thought it was leaking from my car, so I ignored it.
What happened that night?
Um, well, the heat woke me up. It was so unbearable. And I knew something horrible was happening. The smoke was everywhere, and I couldn't breathe. I thought I was dying. And then my instincts kicked in, and then I was falling.
Were you injured that night?
Well, at the time, the adrenaline numbed the pain, but later I looked down and I saw this huge burn mark down the side of my arm. I still have the scar from that night.
Objection, Your Honor. More prejudicial than probative. May I explain?
You may.
Your Honor, although defense acknowledges that Ms. Darrow suffered burn injuries from her house being set on fire, showing her scar with the red and the bloodiness still attached, it's certainly more prejudicial, Your Honor.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
This statement is not intended to sway the jury in any way. She is purely trying to show how it physically affected her.
Last word, defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Darrow just came up here and testified that she suffered injuries, which is already on the record of how the fire affected her. Showing any further bodily injuries is more prejudicial than probative, Your Honor.
All right. I'll overrule it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes. Ma'am, I'd like to circle back to July 1st. Did you notice anything that may have been an area of concern?
Thinking back, I did. Outside, I heard shoes squeaking, so I looked where the sound came from, and I saw a shadow in the tree. I thought it was a wild animal, but now I realize I know that shadow shape.
And how did you recognize the shadow shape?
I see it in my nightmares, that shadow perfectly matched the figure of someone I once knew. And his name was Jimmie Tanks.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, let's give it a moment before cross. All right, you may proceed, counsel for defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Ms. Darrow. I understand that your arm probably still hurts and the house set on fire probably still hurts, but I'll be asking you some few questions tonight.
Sure.
Ma'am, you knew Mr. Tanks in high school, correct?
Yes, we went to the same high school.
Safe to say you didn't have the best relationship?
No, we weren't very close.
You were angry at Mr. Tanks during high school, correct?
Well, during high school, he always made me feel bad about myself, yes.
But ma'am, back in high school, you were pretty popular, correct?
Yes, after I got onto the basketball team, I started to gain more friends.
When you called Mr. Tanks names, everybody else would follow, correct?
Yes, they would.
When you caught Mr. Tanks stealing from a store, you were the one to turn him in, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I knew it was the right thing to do.
Ma'am, after you turned Mr. Tanks in, you claimed that Mr. Tanks threatened you?
Yes, he did.
But ma'am, there were no eyewitnesses at the scene.
No, there weren't.
There were no footage of Mr. Tanks threatening you.
No.
So ma'am, making it clear for the members of the jury, you're the only person we can trust today, correct?
I mean, I'm not sure if there was any footage. I never checked, but yes, as far as I know.
Moving on, Miss Darrow, I'd like to talk to you more about your house. That house belonged to your great aunt Lucia, correct?
Yes, it did.
She passed it on to you?
Yes.
At the time, you had the opportunity to sell that house on the market, correct?
I did, but I never took it. It had a really high market value, but it meant too much to me.
Right, and as time passed after your great aunt's passing, you began gambling, correct?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Of course. After your great aunt passed, you started gambling, correct?
Yeah, her death hit me really hard.
You went into debt.
Yes.
You struggled to make ends meet, correct?
Yeah, I picked up a second job at Walmart to help pay off the debts.
Your Honor, stating for the record, defense is screen sharing Exhibit 3. Mr. Darrow, do you recognize this exhibit?
Yeah, it says up there it's my financial records.
It's a fair and accurate.
Looks like it, yes.
Your Honor, defense moves to enter Exhibit 3 to evidence.
Any objections?
No, Your Honor.
All right. So offered, so accepted.
Ma'am, looking at this financial record, it says you have $200,000 worth of debt and mortgage, correct?
Yes, I mean, I think it's a fair exchange for housing.
And right there under recent transactions, you have $2,000 in gambling loss, correct?
Yes, I'm paying it off.
$15,000 in credit card debt
Yes,
and $10,000 in personal loans, correct?
yes.
Thank you, Tech. You can take that exhibit down. No, ma'am. Now I'd like to take a moment to talk about the night of the fire. Ma'am, you mentioned just now that you smelled gasoline on the day of the fire.
Yes, I did.
Later, you actually saw pools of gasoline around your house, didn't you?
I saw the gasoline, but I thought it was coming from my car.
So, ma'am, making it clear for the members of the jury, you saw pools all around your house, and you thought that was from your car.
I was really rushed and I had to get to work quickly.
Ma'am, is that a yes to my question?
Yes,
So, ma'am, after you saw all that around your house, you didn't take a moment to clean it up?
no, I wish I did.
You claim that at around this time you saw a figure, correct?
Yes,
You thought that the build and features matched Mr. Tanks, correct?
yes,
But ma'am, your view was blocked by a fence, wasn't it?
yeah, I just peered over the fence.
So safe to say your view was obstructed?
Sure, yes.
Ma'am, to your knowledge, could the possibility of someone else who had a build like Mr. Tanks exist?
Yes,
So, Miss Darrow, you can't be 100% certain that the figure was Mr. Tanks, correct?
no, I can't.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, let's give it a moment. All right. With that, any redirect, prosecution?
No, Your Honor. No redirect.
All right, may this witness step down then? All right, prosecution, please call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Dr. Harley Blaze to the stand. Permission to proceed, Your Honor.
You may.
Good evening. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Yes, hello, my name is Dr. Harley Blaze, but the guys at the station call me Hank.
What do you do for a living, Doctor?
I'm the lead fire marshal for Palm Grove.
Now, before we begin, how did you become a fire marshal?
Well, one day my two brothers were playing with matches, and long story short, if my dad hadn't rushed in with a fire extinguisher, we probably would have set the house on fire. But I was inspired by that to protect others from fire, and here we are.
Well, first, I want to talk about your background. To begin, where did you go to school?
I received an associate's degree in fire science from the Madison College Fire Service Educational Center, a bachelor's in engineering from Edgewood, and a doctorate in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin.
Have you received any certifications?
Yes, I've received all three possible certifications from the National Association of Fire Investigators.
Well, do you have any professional experience?
Well, I was hired by the Tilly Fire Department to complete 2 years of specialized training by the Bureau of All Things Fire and while working with the police force.
Do you have any further qualifications?
Well, I gained international certification and attended the mandatory CFI annual refresher trainings, and last year I was promoted to fire marshal, and I can make arrests as well as investigate cases.
Doctor, what materials did you rely on in your assessments of the case at hand?
Well, I was familiar with some of the exhibits as I provided some of them myself. I relied upon my several years of experience in the field, and to make my conclusions, I used reliable methods such as GCMS and FIRE, which I'll get to later, that are widely accepted in the field.
Were the methods you employed in your review of these materials reliable?
Well, absolutely. They're used all around and they're reliable through and through the field.
And how are you involved in today's case, Doctor?
Um, on July 2nd, 2024, I was called by the Tilly Fire Department and I was tasked to assist Willow's Fire Department in investigating the scene and finding the origins of the fire at the Darrow residence.
With this, the prosecution designates Dr. Harley Blaze as an expert.
Any voir direing defense?
No, Your Honor. I believe Dr. Blaze is already approved in the pretrial order.
All right, if you have no objections, I'll allow it.
Doctor, now let's talk about your analysis. What did you first notice when you arrived at the scene of the Darrow residence?
Well, the fire had been mostly put out. Miss Birdie seemed to be mostly okay, and I began standard procedure in collecting evidence and observing evidence.
Well, what did you first notice as you were observing the evidence?
Well, I arrived only 20 or so minutes later, so all the evidence would be mostly unspoiled, and I began immediately by observing burn patterns, which are patterns that are formed once materials are burned.
Well, what did you notice about these particular burn patterns?
Well, these burn patterns were in the distinct shape of a puddle, and that makes it different from all other burn patterns, and it's very, very special.
Doctor, what did you do after your initial investigation with the burn patterns?
Well, after I investigated the origins of the fire, I spoke with Miss Birdie, and she accused Jimmie Tanks of the crime, saying she saw a shadowy figure with two containers in their hand, and which left after Miss Darrow threatened to call the cops.
So, Doctor, what did you do as a result?
Well, I went to the Tanks residence, and I found Jimmie Tanks was in the backyard pouring some kind of liquid into a hazardous waste drum from a red container, and then I arrested him.
Moving on, I want to talk about the container at the Jimmie Tanks residence. So, what was in the red plastic container that you found?
Well, after observing the contents, the liquid was revealed to be gasoline both inside the container and inside the waste drum.
So, did you collect any evidence from the site of the fire?
Yes, well, back at the Darrow residence, I collected 3 samples of fire debris at the site of the fire that I suspected were pour patterns. I first photographed the debris and lifted the debris into the collection can.
So, let's go more in depth about the testing. So, what form of testing did you conduct?
Uh, I used GCMS testing, which has nearly 100% accuracy rate in the scientific community, and I followed a highly reliable method that us at the station call FIRE. It stands for Find, Identify, Review, and Evaluate. And I know a lot of people, and they call it different things with different names, but it's the golden standard in the field, and I had the access to all the proper laboratory equipment to evaluate the fire debris, because not to toot my own horn, but I am one of the most qualified fire experts in the county.
Objection, Your Honor, on the grounds of lack of foundation. May I explain?
Yeah, sure.
Your Honor, I am objecting to the lack of foundation on the statement of Dr. Blaze being one of the most qualified fire investigators in the county. Your Honor, while we are not challenging the credibility of his method, no foundation has been laid as to make him the most qualified or one of the most qualified members of the investigation. Therefore, this is inadmissible.
Okay, counsel for prosecution.
I believe my witness was just saying that he is highly qualified. I believe he wouldn't. I believe he wouldn't say that he's the most qualified. I just believe that he was talking about how his methods and his methods to review this assessment at the case at hand was very qualified. That's
Counsel for prosecution. I might have misheard him, but I believe he said he's one of the most qualified persons in the county or the state. That's what I believe I heard. And we have a foundation objection to that. What say you specifically to whether or not him saying, I am the best in the county or one of the best in the county? What say you as to foundation to that statement?
maybe my witness rephrase his answer.
Sounds like I'm gonna sustain the objection. Counsel for defense, would you like to move to strike at this point since they're asking for the rephrasing?
Yes, Your Honor, motion to strike.
All right, we'll strike the statement. We'll ask the witness to rephrase and avoid bolstering if you can.
Doctor, so what form of testing did you conduct?
Well, moving back, I don't really know what I have to rephrase. I did say I'm one of the most qualified, and one of the most qualified fire experts. So I think
Objection,
someone
Your
misheard.
Honor. Lack of foundation once more, the witness just repeated the stricken statement.
Sounds like deja vu to me, counsel for prosecution. Am I wrong in that regard?
I believe my witness would rephrase his answer now.
All right. I will sustain the objection. I'll ask the witness to refrain to improperly bolstering themselves as one of the finest. And I will strike the previous statement again, and I'll ask counsel to re-ask the question. And witness, please answer.
Yes, Your Honor.
Doctor, so let's talk about your testing. So what form of testing did you conduct?
Well, I use GCMS testing, which has a nearly 100% accuracy rate in the field. And I use the FIRE method, which stands for Find, Identify, Review, and Evaluate. And it's widely renowned in the field.
Now, let's break down these steps. Starting with the F, find. How did you perform the extraction of ignitable compounds?
Well, I use the method called Heated Passive Headspace Concentration, and it's essentially just a stick of charcoal in the fire debris container. This will attract whatever most likely caused the fire, and I like going fishing from time to time, so that's how I explain it to people. This is using bait to lure and catch the fish, the bait being charcoal and the fish being whatever most likely started the fire.
Now, let's go on to the I, identify. What can you tell us about this step?
Well, I ran each sample separately through a GCMS, which stands for Gas Chromatography Mass Spectrometry, but don't get scared away by the name. The nature of science is to add a lot of simple things and make a complex thing. This is just a fancy way of saying vaporizing the liquid and running it through a series of tests so we can know what it is. Following our fish analogy, this is like measuring the fish, looking for discernible features so we can see what we can see.
Doctor, what can you tell us about the next step? R, review.
The fire debris was analyzed for hydrocarbons, as they are usually the primary components of many flammable substances and could possibly be used to identify what caused the fire. This would be like compiling all the stuff we found in the identification This is like finding what shape the fish was, what kind of category it fit in, stuff like that.
And what were these results from your last step? E, evaluation.
Well, it'll easier to be show and explain if you could show the exhibit.
Your Honor, let the record reflect that my co-counsel will not screen share what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 7 for witness identification purposes.
Okay. Record so reflect.
Do you recognize the exhibit on the screen?
Absolutely, I made it myself.
Have they been changed or altered in any way?
Doesn't look like it.
Your Honor, permission to move Exhibit 7 into evidence.
Any objections?
Nothing, Your Honor.
I'm sorry, counsel for defense, I didn't hear you. One more time.
Nothing, no objections, Your Honor.
No objections. Okay, without objection, I'll allow it.
Doctor, so what do these two graphs mean?
Well, you don't really need to know what they mean, more what they represent. So the top is the test results for gasoline. The second one is the test results for the fire debris sample. And the idea is if it's gasoline, it'll match. If it's not gasoline, it'll look completely different. And if you overlay them like this.
Your Honor, I believe the prosecution's direct examination time is up.
All right. With that in mind, I will allow the prosecution 2 questions to finish, and then we'll proceed forward with cross. Before doing that, timekeeper for prosecution, do you agree that the time is up? Timekeeper for prosecution, I did not hear you.
Could you hear me now?
I can hear you now, yes.
My apologies, Your Honor. Yes, we believe that the time is also elapsed.
Okay, counsel for prosecution got 2 questions to go ahead and land this plane, please.
Yes, Your Honor. Thus, Dr. Blaze, what do you conclude from your investigation?
Well, seeing as how similar those two spectrographs are, that means the tested liquid was most likely gasoline, and I can conclude to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that the fire at Bertie Darrow's residency was intentionally set using gasoline along the outer perimeter of the residence, which then spread into the inside of the house and the upper floors.
Thank you. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right, cross. Actually, before cross, let's just give it a moment, please. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Doctor, I want to begin by talking about what you know about my client, Mr. Tanks, in today's case. Now, you cannot prove to the jury that Mr. Tanks was at the crime scene, can you?
Can you repeat that question?
Doctor, you cannot prove to the jury that Mr. Tanks was at the crime scene, can you?
No, I can't definitively prove that he was anywhere.
So you could have collected fingerprint evidence?
Well, it's hard to collect forensic evidence in a 1500 degree fire. Even after the fire, any forensic evidence would most likely have been completely destroyed, which is pretty standard in most arson cases.
So you have no forensic evidence, do you?
We don't rely on forensic evidence in an arson case because any forensics would have been completely destroyed. As I already mentioned, house fires burned at 1500 degrees Fahrenheit. Gasoline burns almost double that. So forensic evidence is just out of the question.
So a yes to my question that you have no forensic evidence, right?
Yeah, we don't we don't use forensic evidence.
But nor did you interview any neighbors, right?
No, I didn't. I didn't think that was necessary.
So you only interviewed one person?
Yes, I interviewed Miss Bertie Darrow and then led straight into my investigation.
I want to talk about you to learn from your one single interview. You know Miss Darrow immediately pointed her finger?
Well, yeah, she gave me a suspect, and then I went and investigated the suspect.
She immediately accused.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
Pursuant to Stipulation 5, Dr. Harley Blaze had probable cause to arrest Jimmie Tanks.
Counsel for defense would say.
Your Honor, we are not attacking the probable cause. Now, there was probable cause, but the witness cannot prove this beyond a reasonable doubt, which is the standard in today's case. Therefore, Your Honor, we are challenging whether or not the doctor had sufficient evidence to prove that the suspect he had is really a criminal.
Counsel for prosecution does I tend to agree with counsel for defense. In your opinion, or is your argument that probable cause, the determination of probable cause means that he can't challenge the evidence in this case?
Your Honor, the line of questioning is challenging the probable cause, opposing counsel is saying how my witness arrested Jimmie Tanks based on Birdie Darrow's statements, which is challenging stipulation 5, where Harley Blaze had probable cause to arrest Jimmie Tanks.
All right, what say you specifically to the argument that he's not challenging probable cause? He's saying there wasn't enough evidence for beyond a reasonable doubt. He's challenging the evidence in light of what the standard is today. What say you specifically to that argument?
Reasonable doubt. However, opposing counsel is saying how my witness only arrested Jimmie Tanks based on Bertie Darrow's statements, and that is challenging the probable cause for my witness to arrest Jimmie Tanks.
Last word, counsel for defense.
Yes, Your Honor, probable cause is a low bar. One witness's testimony is enough to make probable cause. However, only one person's accusation isn't enough to reach the prosecution's burden here today. Therefore, we are challenging the latter, not the cause.
Yeah, I think this goes to the weight, not the admissibility, and he can question the credibility of the evidence for the jury to talk about the weight of it. I'll overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Dr. Blaze, when you interviewed Ms. Darrow, she immediately pointed her finger, right?
Yeah, she did.
She pointed to Mr. Tanks.
Yeah, which is when I went and to his household.
To be clear, the only person you interviewed framed Mr. Tanks for the crime, right?
Well, framed is a pretty strong word you're using there. She definitely did accuse him, but I wouldn't say framed.
Well, Doctor, let's talk about the word you would use. You would say that Ms. Darrow accused with no concrete evidence pointing towards Mr. Tanks, right?
Well, she said she saw a shadowy figure that resembled Mr. Tanks, and because that was the only evidence and only suspect that I had to go off of at the time, I went there and to investigate further, because that's the only lead that I had.
Well, there was a shadowy figure, but no one could see the person's face, right?
Well, and if I went to Mr. Tanks' house and everything checked out, then I would leave and investigate another lead. That's how things work.
So I'm not talking about another lead, I'm talking about this lead. No, Bertie Darrow couldn't see the face of the shadowy figure, could she?
No, she didn't tell me she could.
She couldn't see the hair color of that person?
Can you repeat that? I can't really hear you that well.
She couldn't see the hair color of that person, could she?
No, she couldn't see the color of their hair.
All she can tell is the body shape, isn't it?
Yes, the basic form and shadow, yes.
Now you'd agree with me that two people can have the same body shape?
Well, absolutely.
I want to talk about how it is possible for my client to have gotten from the crime scene all the way to her house. No, you know it's a 20-minute drive, right?
20-minute drive from where?
From the crime scene to Miss Tanks' house, right?
Yeah.
Now that is 20 minutes. You didn't look at any GPS records to see if Miss Tanks drove all the way?
Why would GPS from Mr. Tanks's car?
Right, you didn't look at any GPS to see if Mr. Tanks drove for 20 minutes?
No, I didn't check that.
You didn't look at traffic cameras to see if she was driving along the road?
Well, I didn't have access to those cameras.
So, to be clear, you never requested to see those cameras either, right?
Well, I was a little busy doing the investigation, but yeah, I never bothered to go through the paperwork to see those footage.
So you were busy, so you didn't see if my client drove to the crime scene at all?
No, I didn't check that.
I want to talk about what you did after you got to my client's house. Now, you saw my client pouring something, right?
Yeah, she was pouring gasoline into a drum.
Right, you saw her pour gasoline at her house, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
And you immediately arrested her.
Well, well, if I may, I'm gonna explain the process here. So if there's been a fire-related crime, and the first suspect I get is pouring an accelerant of fire, even if in their own backyard, that gives me enough probable cause to at least suspect that Mr. Tanks could have committed the crime, and then um, that gives me enough cause to detain him before he could theoretically do any more crimes.
Doctor, I'm not focusing on the probable cause, I'm focusing on the proof. You saw my client pour gasoline at her own house, but you cannot prove she was pouring gasoline at the crime scene, can you?
Not at the time. I couldn't definitively prove it.
I want to stick with the fish analogy from earlier. No, you know the size of the fish, right?
Yes.
You know the shape of the fish?
Yes.
But sir, you cannot prove whose fish it is, can you?
Well, no.
You cannot prove how the fish got to the lake?
So, sir, let's walk through this. So let's say we found a grouper, and right up the lake, there's a man with hundreds of them, and they're all swimming around. If we see this man with the kind of fish we caught later down the lake, then that leads me to assume that it's very likely that this man had something to do with the fish being over there.
Well, so you cannot prove that the fish swam all the way for 20 minutes, just like you cannot prove my client drove for 20 minutes to the crime scene.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes.
Compound question.
Sustained. I do think this question's a little wordy.
Yes, Your Honor.
Please rephrase, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Well, doctor, you cannot prove the fish definitely swam down the lake, can you?
I can't definitively prove anything, and would be very surprised if I ever did. What I don't need a definitively 100% with like beyond a shadow of a doubt prove it. I just need to be beyond reasonable doubt that Jimmie Tanks burning down the house is the only reasonable explanation, and my job isn't to pin the blame on Jimmie Tanks. My job is to find the most reasonable explanation for the house going up in flames. And for me, that was gasoline. I found gasoline at Jimmie Tanks' residence. Do what you wish with that information.
Sir, you cannot prove that Jimmie Tanks was at the crime scene at the time of the crime, can you?
I cannot definitively prove anything.
Your Honor, I have no further questions for the witness.
All right, one moment, please. All right. I don't believe the prosecution has time for a redirect, if I'm correct.
No redirect, Your Honor.
Okay. May this witness step down then.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Anything further from the prosecution?
No, Your Honor. The prosecution closes its case in chief.
All right. The prosecution closes case in chief. Prosecution rests. Based on that, let's if we're good on time, I'm thinking a 5-minute break, if that's okay with everybody. All right. Prosecution having rested. Defense, will you be putting a case in chief? You do not have the burden, so you do not have to. It's your choice.
Yes, Your Honor, defense does have a case in chief.
All right. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Defense would like to call Miss Jordan Parks to the stand. Good evening, ma'am. Please introduce yourself for the members of the jury.
Hello. My name is Jordan Parks. I know, a boy name for a girl. I've heard it all. But, while my sister was watching Hannah Montana, I was watching Bob the Builder. So I guess you could say that, some things are just meant to be.
Ma'am, where are you from?
Well, I lived in a little hamlet for most of my life, but recently I moved to Willow. It's a city, it's about 2.5 hours away from Little Hamlet by drive.
Miss Parks, at Willow, what do you do for a living?
Well, I work at only the best store ever. It's called Nuts and Bolts.
What's nuts and bolts?
It's a hardware store that's between the two cities of Willow and Little Hamlet.
Ma'am, how's business over at Nuts and Bolts?
Business is doing okay right now. We get some customers here and there, but all I know for a fact about that store is that I just love my job there.
Ma'am, why do you love your job?
It's just so amazing, the environment there. My boss is the best, and I really feel supported at work. I even remember my first customer, Jimmie Tanks. He came in the store twice, I believe. In fact, I guess I remember a lot of my customers.
Ma'am, who else do you remember?
I remember Bertie Darrow. That's another customer. And I even know the order they came in. Jimmie came in first, and then Birdie came in second, and then Jimmie came in the store again.
Ma'am, let's talk about those 3 encounters one by one. First, starting with the encounter with Jimmie Tanks. What was your first encounter like with Mr. Tanks?
Well, I was just over the moon happy to see my very first customer. I was so excited that I went up to him to ask if he needed any help, and I knew that I was ready. But he said that he just wanted to look around himself a little bit, but later I ran into him, and then I figured out what he needed from the store.
What did Mr. Tanks need from nuts and bolts?
He bought a rope, cloth, gasoline, and an American flag.
Ma'am, did Mr. Tanks ever tell you why he knew those items?
Yes, he did. Jimmie said that he was going on a camping trip for 4th of July and he needed supplies.
Moving on, man, let's talk about that second encounter you had with Mr. Tanks. When did you meet him for the second time?
This was about 3 weeks later on July 1st. That was the last day that, we'd be open before Independence Day.
During the second encounter, what did Mr. Tanks need?
This time, Jimmie really needed a tank of gasoline, but the problem is we were sold out that day.
And what happened after you told Mr. Tanks that you were sold out of gasoline?
I called another hardware store to see if they were open, and they were. So I gave Jimmie the directions, he bought a pack of gum, and then he left.
Directions, ma'am. Directions where? Where was the other hardware store?
The other hardware store was in Little Hamlet.
Now, let's talk about that encounter with Miss Bertie Darrow. How did you get to know Miss Darrow?
On June 25th, just about 10 minutes before we closed, Birdie came in and introduced themselves.
What did Miss Darrow want to buy from you?
Birdie wanted some supplies for a paint job. Birdie got some paintbrushes, and then a lot of paint thinner.
A lot. Ma'am, how much paint thinner did Miss Darrow buy?
Birdie bought 2 very big cans of paint thinner.
Did you do anything else after Miss Darrow bought those from you?
Well, it's part of my job to tell Birdie some safety precautions since they were buying paint thinner. But they interrupted and yelled at me, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to tell them everything they needed to know.
So, ma'am, what were those safety precautions to paint thinner that you didn't get to tell her about?
That paint thinner is flammable. I started to tell Birdie that, the paint thinner is flammable, but I was interrupted by her. I knew she should have listened to me when I saw that her house was on fire on the news.
Man, let's talk about that fire now. What happened after you heard on the news of the fire?
Nothing much. I went on with my day, reviewing records from nuts and bolts and just reading my books. But then this fire marshal came in, and he asked me to open up the store even though we were closed.
Ma'am, did you open up that store for the fire marshal?
Yes, I did.
What did the fire marshal want from you?
He wanted some CCTV footage from the night before, but we didn't have any footage because the store is really old. But I showed him the transactions from Birdie and Jimmie.
So, ma'am, after you showed him those transactions, did the fire marshal want anything else of you?
He just asked a lot of questions about Jimmie and Birdie, but they were just customers to me. So I didn't know anything besides what they bought and our interactions at the store.
What happened after those questions?
He told me that Jimmie Tanks might have been the one to set the fire, but I thought it would have been impossible.
Your Honor, let the record reflect we're now screen sharing Exhibit 9. Ms. Parks, do you recognize this exhibit?
Yes, I do.
It's a fair and accurate copy.
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, we move to enter Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Any objections?
Yes, Your Honor, as to hearsay.
All right. And what exactly is hearsay in this photo, ma'am?
This is an out-of-court document being brought into court and being used for the state of the truth of the matter asserted.
All right. Counsel for defense?
Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to bring your attention to something opposing counsel just said, that this is a document, it's not a statement, and that's not hearsay, because hearsay is a statement That's out of court. Take it for the truth of the matter. This is simply a picture, Your Honor.
Agreed. I'll overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, we are now screen sharing a demonstrative that goes along with the testimony of Ms. Parks, shown outside the purview of the witness. So, ma'am, you just said that you thought it would have been impossible. Why do you think that?
Well, I was with Jimmie at the store until about 10:40 at night. The drive is about an hour to get to Little Hamlet from Nuts and Bolts. I arrived at about 11:40, and around 2.5 hours from Little Hamlet to get back to Willow.
Thank you, Tech. You may take that down. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, one moment, please. All right, Cross.
Good evening, Ms. Parks.
Hi.
I'd like to begin by discussing your relationship with Bertie Darrow. You met Birdie a week before the 4th of July, correct? Ma'am?
All right, let's.
Sorry, I think I had some technical issues.
It's all right, ma'am. Take your time.
All right, let's re-ask the question. We'll back the clock up, let's say 10 seconds. And you may proceed, counsel, for prosecution.
Yes, Your Honor. Ma'am, you met Bertie Darrow a week before the 4th of July, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Now, she was at your store to buy some supplies for a paint job?
Yes, she bought some paint, paintbrushes, and 2 cans of paint thinner.
And she also purchased a fire extinguisher, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Now, just to be clear, Miss Parks, you're not very fond of Bertie Darrow, correct?
I mean, based off of those, I don't know how long, but it was very close to when we closed. I mean, Bertie Darrow just seemed a little impatient at that time.
Is that a yes to my question, ma'am?
Yes, based off of that little time that I met them.
Now I'd like to discuss your interactions with the defendant in today's case, Jimmie Tanks. Jimmie Tanks was actually your first customer, correct?
Yes, that's right. I was very excited.
And he went to look around the store by himself, correct?
Yes, that's right.
You then found Jimmie in the fire igniter aisle?
Yes, I believe so.
And he told you that he was going on a camping trip, correct?
Yes, for the 4th of July.
But this struck you as a little weird?
I mean, yes, just a little bit.
And this struck you as a little weird because there are not any places nearby to go camping, correct?
Yes, but I just thought, maybe he'd drive somewhere else since it's Independence Day, so a lot of places are closed on that day.
Now, one of the supplies Jimmie needed was gasoline, correct?
Yes, that's right.
And Jimmie Tanks, he came back on July 1st, correct?
Yes, that was the last day that we'd be open before we closed for the Independence Day break.
And he looked worried?
Yeah, he just seemed like he really needed something.
Jimmie was pacing around the store?
Yes, I think, he came in for a specific purpose, but we were all sold out of what he needed.
And you mentioned you were sold out of what he needed, and what he needed was a tank of gasoline, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you mentioned you were already out of gasoline, but he begged you to look again, correct?
Yes, I think he just really needed it.
And you showed Jimmie a map that night.
Yes, I did.
And Jimmie noted that the fire department was on 6th and Broadway.
Yes, it was.
And Jimmie said, if something were to burn down around there, at least help would be nearby so it wouldn't get out of hand.
Yes, I believe he said that.
And after this, Jimmie left, correct?
Yes, he bought a pack of gum and then he left the store.
And then you remembered that you might have a spare tank of gas in the back shed?
Yes, I had just remembered that.
The shed that you remember locking?
Yes, as far as I had remembered.
However, when you went to investigate, the shed was open.
Yes, it was.
The gasoline tank was missing?
Yes, there was one missing, I believe.
To make this clear for the members of the jury, Jimmie had already left when you realized that the gasoline was missing.
Yes.
Now, you told Jimmie about another hardware store in Little Hamlet, correct?
Yes, that's what I did.
But you have no idea if he actually went to Little Hamlet, do you?
Not for certain, but he did seem like he really needed it, so I assume that he'd go wherever had it.
You never saw Jimmie's car heading towards Little Hamlet, correct?
No, not myself.
In fact, 5 minutes after you found the tank of gasoline missing, you saw a car drive back towards Willow, correct?
Yes, I saw a car.
And this is the opposite direction of Little Hamlet?
Yes, it is.
Now, this car, it looked a lot like Jimmie's?
I mean, from what I saw, I guess, but it was, really, it was really late, so I don't know for sure whose car it was.
The headlights that you saw on the car were distinctive, correct?
I mean, yeah, but I guess, it could be someone else's car, and I just don't want to make an assumption if I don't know for 100%.
But the next morning, you heard that Bertie Darrow's house had burned down?
Yes, I did.
No, ma'am, Bertie Darrow's house is in Willow, correct?
That's right.
And the direction in which you saw the car that looked like Jimmie's driving that night?
Yes, it was. I believe that's where he lives.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, one moment, please. Any redirect based on that?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. May I proceed?
You may.
Ma'am, just now you were asked some questions about that missing tank of gasoline. I'd like to talk to you about that. Why do you think that the gasoline was missing?
I mean, it was really that late that night. But come to think of it, my amazing boss could have come to take a tank of gasoline for his car.
Ma'am, when you were asked about a car going towards Willow, do you see a lot of cars traveling to the direction of Willow?
Yes, I do.
Thank you, ma'am. No further questions, Your Honor. Make the witness step down.
Not yet, counsel. Based on that, any recross from the prosecution?
No, Your Honor, no recross.
All right, now the witness may step down. One moment, please. Well, actually, counsel for defense, please call your second witness, and let's give it a moment before you start asking questions.
Yes, Your Honor. At this point, we call Inspector and Reynolds to the stand.
All right. Counsel for defense, you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening, Mr. Reynolds. Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Good evening. My name is Marshall Reynolds.
Mr. Reynolds, what do you do for a living?
I'm a senior investigator, insurance investigator with the Tilly Insurance Group, specializing in arson cases.
Let's start with your background. How did you get into this line of work?
I grew up in rural Arizona, where wildfires were a relatively constant threat. My father himself was a volunteer firefighter. Whenever a fire broke out, he'd always head straight to it, no hesitation. No matter how dangerous it got, he always came back. He was a real hero, until one day he did not return to us.
And how did that experience shape your career?
Losing him was a devastating chapter in my life, but it gave me a purpose. I wanted to understand fires, how they start, how they spread, and most importantly, how they could be prevented.
Doctor, what qualifications help you prevent fires from starting?
I earned a Master of Science in Fire and Safety Engineering from the University of Michigan. After graduating, I spent 20 years as a fire and arson detective before transitioning to my current role as an insurance investigator.
And what is the job of an insurance investigator?
I make sure that people asking for property insurance are honest. Some people who need money commit fraud by framing arson as an accident.
Can you tell us your certifications for that line of work?
Certainly. I'm certified by the Tilly Insurance Group as an investigator in structural failure and fire safety.
When you investigate cases, Inspector, what method do you use?
I follow the standard investigative protocol in fire science. This includes looking for burn patterns, collecting samples, and conducting various tests.
Is that protocol considered reliable by other people in a field?
Yes, sir, it is widely accepted and regularly used by professionals in fire investigations.
And did you apply the method reliably to today's case?
Yes, I applied the method exactly as it is intended.
Your Honor, pursuant to the pretrial order, Inspector Reynolds is approved by the court as an expert in fire and insurance investigations.
Counsel for prosecution, what say you?
No objections, Your Honor. Pursuant to the pretrial courts, M. Reynolds is an expert.
Okay. You may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. Sir, I want to start with the first part of your protocol, burn patterns. Can you tell the jury what they are?
Absolutely. When fires ignite, they leave marks on the grounds and the walls. These patterns are different depending on what started the fire.
And what type of burn patterns, if any, were you able to find on Bertie Darrow's property?
I observed distinct burn patterns on the outer walls, something known as a linear or line-shaped burn pattern that led from the porch of the house to the walls.
And what did a linear line-shaped burn pattern mean in this case?
The linear burn patterns leading from the porch to the wall shows the deliberate use of an accelerant to ignite and spread the fire. This kind of controlled fire movement is inconsistent with an accidental fire, which usually spreads in more sporadic and unpredictable patterns.
Now, earlier you also talked about collecting samples. Doctor, what type of samples were you able to find?
I collected 2 samples. I collected one from the linear burn pattern on the porch, and the second one from the area burn pattern on the outer walls.
And what do you do with samples after you collected them?
I send them to laboratories for chromatography testing to analyze their chemical composition and identify the presence of any accelerants.
And what is a chromatography test?
Chromatography is like breaking down the ingredients of a recipe, like a cake, to see what's inside of it. I actually prepared a demonstrative for the jury to have them see it better.
Your Honor, permission for the inspector to show a demo to the jury?
All right. Prosecution, have you had an opportunity to see this demonstrative?
Yes, during the captain's meeting. Yes.
All right. Any objections?
No objections, Your Honor.
All right. Go forth, defense.
Go ahead, Inspector. Tell us what that means.
So like I was saying, the chromatography part separates the compounds in the gasoline, just like if we separated the different compounds that make up this blot of ink on this chromatography paper. Here we can see that it's made up of a dark blue. I'm going to take this and put it in a bowl of water, stir it around a little bit. And now you can see that there's a lighter blue, different colors of different shades of blue that spread from the darker ink in the middle. That probably stopped because it's dripping all over the place, but that's the chromatography testing essentially.
Inspector, you've showed us the different components of a liquid, but how do we determine what type of liquid it really is?
We would then analyze how much of each compound, or in this case, how much of each color is present. For example, two inks might look the same on first glance, but the compounds or colors that make it up on the inside are different.
Is it the same experiment that Dr. Blaze conducted in his research?
To my understanding, yes, it is, but there is a difference.
What difference?
I collected samples from inside the house and near the porch. It is my understanding that Dr. Blaze did not.
And what were the results from your two samples of testing?
The test reviewed the presence of paint thinner, a highly flammable liquid, in the linear and area burn patterns.
Why is the presence of paint thinner important to today's case?
Paint thinner is highly volatile and ignites easily, making it an effective accelerant for starting and spreading fires. Its specific presence in the burn patterns indicates deliberate application.
Inspector, I want to shift gears now and talk about your interviews. Did you talk to anyone regarding the case?
Yes, I interviewed Bertie Darrow, the homeowner, about the financial situation.
Why the financial situation?
I wanted to ensure that Darrow was honest when it came to the insurance.
And was he honest with his money?
No, Darrow had lied to me. Their statements.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes.
Pursuant to Rule 801, this is hearsay. This witness is using the statements that Darrow has told to him to prove the truth of the matter asserted.
And what statements being elicited specifically?
Darrow lied to me. She wasn't honest.
Okay, counsel for defense.
Yes, Your Honor. This is an exception under Rule 703. Specifically, Inspector Reynolds, an expert, is able to use inadmissible evidence in order to help him form the conclusion. This statement is a key part of how he comes to that conclusion. Therefore, it is admissible.
Counsel for prosecution, they're saying 703 applies here. What say you?
I believe 703 is not one of the hearsay exceptions. The hearsay exceptions are 803s, not 703. 703s are expert testimony. I'm objecting to Rule 801, pursuing the Rule 801 hearsay.
Understood, and you're right, but I do believe 703 allows for if the expert relied on it, allows for and otherwise inadmissible testimony to come in. What say you specifically as to whether or not this expert is being used as a conduit for hearsay or just simply explaining his facts and data that led to his conclusion?
I believe this expert is using Bertie Darrow statements, and I don't believe this expert is an expert in insurance investigating, not Bertie Darrow statements. This expert is using Bertie Darrow statements to prove the truth of the matter asserted.
Counsel for defense, they're saying it's a conduit. What say you in regards to whether or not this is a conduit or not a conduit for hearsay? Specifically, whatever is being elicited here.
Your Honor, this is not a conduit. We laid the foundation in the beginning that an insurance investigator has to take a look at the statements of the homeowner to make sure that they are honest when asking for insurance money. Here, Bertie Darrow is clearly not being honest, and this is an essential part of Inspector Reynolds' investigation.
Fine. I'll overrule the objection, but not in the reasoning that I've heard. I think if it's not coming in for the truth, then it's just not hearsay. And a lie, by definition, is not the truth. So I'll overrule it.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Inspector Reynolds, can you tell us again if Miss Darrow was honest with her money?
Again, Darrow lied to me. Their statements didn't match up with the facts that I reviewed.
And what facts did you review?
They initially claimed to be financially stable, but their financial records revealed significant financial debt.
And why did you bring this up?
Based on my experience as an insurance investigator, I recognized that this financial strain could have proved a motive for arson, as the insurance policy on the home would pay out to be $925,000, sorry.
Inspector, and bringing all this evidence together, what, in your professional opinion, was the likely cause of the fire?
The most likely cause of the fire was arson, given the deliberate burn patterns, the presence of paint thinner, and the inconsistencies in the homeowner's testimony.
Thank you, Inspector, for your testimony here today. Your Honor, no further questions at this point.
All right, one moment, please. Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed?
You may proceed.
Good evening, Mr. Reynolds.
Evening.
First, I want to talk about your job. You work as an insurance investigator for the Tilly Insurance Group.
Correct.
Naturally, you get paid for your work.
Correct.
You get paid thousands of dollars?
Correct. I was compensated for my time and expertise. That is standard practice for expert witnesses.
Yes, but not only that, you got paid an extra $15,000 for your work on this case?
That is correct. This is standard practice for expert witnesses consulting in trials and cases.
Yes, and in this case, your company has $925,000 at stake.
I wouldn't say at stake. It is the job of an insurance company to pay the homeowner if an accidental fire broke out. It's just how insurance companies across the U.S. work naturally.
So is that a yes to my question? Your company has to pay out $925,000?
Yes, that's how insurance companies operate.
So this amount is something that they will have to give, correct?
Correct. This is how insurance companies operate, like I said.
Yes, this is how insurance companies operate. So this is amount that they will have to give unless the policy owner is found liable for the incident?
That is correct.
And now you're here in court today with evidence that Darrow, the property owner, may have burned down his own home?
That is correct.
So, sir, you're here testifying for the one thing that can save your company from a nearly $1 million payout?
No, I'm here to testify to bring the truth, the facts, and the evidence so that that the attorneys can and the judges can rule out and see what happens. I'm not here to save my company. Like I said, insurance companies always operate by providing individuals who have been involved in accidents with compensation.
Yes, Mr. Reynolds, I understand. But however, you are testifying to the fact that Darrow, the property owner, may have burned down his own home, and that would make your company to not pay the $925,000. Is that
Yeah,
right?
correct. That's just how the policy operates.
Yes. Let's talk about your analysis. Now, you're aware that there was another investigator on the scene?
Correct.
A fire investigator, Dr. Harley Blaze?
Correct.
And the two of you actually agree on some points?
Correct. We had some overlapping conclusions that we made.
Yes, you both think that the likely cause of this fire was arson, right?
Correct.
However, you disagree on the substance that started it?
Correct. My testing revealed it was paint thinner and not gasoline, as Dr. Blaze had initially concluded.
So let's talk about why you may have not found any traces of that gasoline. So you're aware the gasoline is highly volatile.
Correct.
So gasoline evaporates very quickly?
Correct.
And you didn't arrive at the scene until several hours after Dr. Blaze?
Correct.
And doctor, in those several hours, it's possible that gasoline had already evaporated?
It's possible, but based on the precautions taken by the investigators on scene, it is highly unlikely.
So is that a yes to my question that in those 7 hours that gasoline could have already evaporated?
It's always a possibility, never a certainty.
So that's a yes to my question, Mr. Reynolds.
Yes, it's a possibility.
And Mr. Reynolds, you never found any evidence of Miss Darrow with any gasoline before the fire, did you?
Correct. That was because my evidence had pointed to paint thinner being the substance involved.
Well, let's shift gears and talk about someone who did. Well, sir, you're aware that the defendant was found with gasoline at his own home?
Correct. That was what was included in Dr. Blaze's report.
That he was found with an industrial-sized barrel of gasoline?
Correct.
One he was pouring from when he was arrested the day of the fire?
Correct.
And sir, you also reviewed some video footage.
Correct, I did.
So video footage from Darrow's home?
That is true.
And in that video footage, there was a shadowy figure moving around the property?
Correct. No distinguishable features, however, were observed on that figure.
Yes, that shadowy figure held 2 containers.
Correct.
The shadowy figure's build matched the defendant's.
Many people's builds around the world match the defendant's.
So is that a yes to my question that the shadowy figure's build matched the defendant's?
Correct, but that does not necessarily mean it was a defendant. But that's a yes to your question.
Thank you. And doctor, that figure that looked just like the defendant was seen around Darrow's home just hours.
Your Honor. Attorney testifying. May I explain?
No, overrule.
Should I restate the question?
It's your examination. You could restate, you could move on. It's your examination, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor. Doctor, that figure that looked just like the defendant was seen around Darrow's home just hours before that house burned down?
The defendant didn't look like the individual in the security camera footage did not look like the defendant. They had a similar build, but that's a yes to your question. They were spotted around the premises.
Just hours before the house burned down, right?
Correct.
Thank you for your time today. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, one moment, please. All right, with that, anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor, we have nothing further. May the witness be excused.
Yes.
And Your Honor, at this time, defense rests all case in chief.
All right. Defense having rested, let's take another 5-minute break and then we'll proceed to summations. All right, both sides having rested. Prosecution, will you be having a closing?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you may proceed.
The fires of their hate set the house ablaze. Members of the jury, today you have heard how 3 years ago the defendant, Jimmie Tanks, went to jail for stealing at a thrift shop. You have heard how 3 years ago she lost everything. 3 years ago, Jimmie Tanks made a promise. She promised Bertie Darrow that she would find her and kill her. And you have heard now, exactly 3 years later, Miss Darrow's house went up in flames, lit up by none other than the person who made the promise 3 years ago, Jimmie Tanks. The fires of their hate set the house ablaze. Today, the prosecution is charging the defendant with arson and attempted murder, which means that the defendant purposely and knowingly burned down Miss Darrow's house. Attempted means they tried to end Miss Darrow's life, but failed. And the prosecution has proven to you today, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defendant, Jimmie Tanks, purposely and knowingly burned down Miss Darrow's house and attempted to end her life on July the 1st, 2024. And we've proven this to you through 3 key facets: the motive, the fire, and the analysis. First, the motive. You see, members of the jury, the defendant and Bertie Darrow were never on good terms. In fact, they've had bad blood since high school. As you have heard today, on February 26, 2021, exactly 3 years before, the defendant was caught stealing from a pawn shop by none other than Miss Darrow. By doing the right thing despite the hesitation, she turned the defendant in. 3 days later, the defendant promised Miss Darrow, "You're going to pay big time when I get out. I'm going to kill you." Moving on, the fire. Members of the jury, as you have heard today, it was a normal day for Bertie Darrow until it wasn't. When she got home, she found gasoline all over her house. Despite what the defense has tried to tell you today about how the security camera footage is blurry. However, you have heard on cross-examination of defense's expert, Mr. Reynolds himself, that the figure does bear a striking resemblance to the defendant. Later at midnight, as promised by the defendant, Bertie Darrow's house went up in flames. That house was the one last living reminder of his dear Aunt Lucia. Lastly, the analysis. Today, the prosecution has called up an investigator, Dr. Harley Blaze, who came to the scene about 20 minutes after the fire, so all the evidence wouldn't be contaminated. And today, Dr. Blaze testified to the fact that the cause of this fire is almost 100% arson, with gasoline as the accelerant. The defense's insurance investigator, Mr. Reynolds, agrees it's arson, but doesn't agree on the accelerant. However, As you have heard on cross-examination, that gasoline evaporates very quickly, and Reynolds arrived 7 hours late. So, of course, there was no way that he would have found any gasoline at the scene, because it would have already evaporated. In conclusion, members of the jury, 3 years ago, Jimmie Tanks made a promise, and 3 years later, she fulfilled it. In Bertie Darrow's house, the one last living reminder of her Aunt Lucia went up in flames. Witnesses on both sides agreed that the most probable cause was arson and concluded that the shadowy figure bears a striking resemblance to the defendant. Members of the jury, as this trial commences, you have the opportunity to deliver justice, and when you do, you'll see that there's only one verdict that gives Bertie Darrow the justice she deserves. Because the fires of their hate set the house ablaze. Find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Your Honor, members of the jury, may it please the court. He was framed by the flames. Members of the jury, my client, Mr. Tanks, is a good man. He just got out of prison and he is determined to make his life right again by correcting the wrongs, by forgetting about the past and looking towards his future. But because of the prosecution, because their old enemy tried to frame him with the flames, members of the jury, my client is accused of a crime that he didn't commit and that he wasn't even anywhere close to. Members of the jury, the prosecution couldn't bring to you credible evidence today. Everything they've brought towards you are either challenged, either destroyed, or just non-existent. But members of the jury, my member of the government wants to put a regular citizen into prison. When they want to convict someone, they have a burden. They took on the burden of beyond a reasonable doubt, members of the jury. That doesn't mean that they had probable cause to put them in prison. That doesn't even mean they think it's highly suspect. It doesn't even mean it's highly likely, members of the jury. Beyond a reasonable doubt means you have no reason not to believe them, and they just couldn't fulfill the burden. We've brought to you not one, not two, but 3 reasons why there are reasonable doubt in today's case. And I want to go through them one by one, beginning with the flames. Members of the jury, today the experts both agree it was arson, but yet the expert from the prosecution, Dr. Blaze, couldn't even prove to you it was certainly gasoline. All he could tell you is the 2 graphs, the 2 pictures matched. But members of the jury, you heard today that she only did half the investigation. He only looked at the outside of the house. He didn't look at the porch, now the inside. Only one location, members of the jury. And when we brought our expert here today, Mr. Reynolds, well, he came up and he told you paint thinner was the most abundant material there. The same paint thinner that Bertie Darrow bought. That brings me to the second fact. The fraud. Members of the jury, I want you to think about who had something to gain from today's case. Who had something to gain from the house burning down? And members of the jury, it's not Mr. Tanks. And even though the state, they kept on repeating that it was his hate that started the fire, members of the jury, it was their own witnesses' greed. You heard that Bertie Darrow was in debt, in heavy debt, members of the jury, and if his house burned down by somebody else, he would stand to gain almost $1 million. $1 million, members of the jury, is what Miss Darrow thinks she can walk away with today. But that's not true, because we found out about her scheme. We found out she tried to frame my client with the flames. That brings me to my third piece of doubt, the flame, members of the jury. Today, you've heard from the prosecution's star witness, Dr. Blaze, and Dr. Blaze couldn't even provide you the evidence that my client was at the crime scene. He couldn't tell you that my client ever poured the gasoline near the crime scene. He couldn't tell you if my client even made his way to the crime scene. Members of the jury, saying that you have all the evidence is not enough, because all the evidence to the prosecution means 3 pieces of fairly supported facts that they are trying to argue. All the forensic evidence was destroyed. And the doctor, he was too lazy to check for security cameras or GPS. He told you that himself. Doubt after doubt after doubt, members of the jury, it points towards one fact, that my client, Mr. Tanks, he was framed with the flames. Members of the jury, in less than a minute, Ms. Hung is going to come up, and she thinks that she has the last word in today's case. But she doesn't. Neither do I. You have the last word in today's case. Members of the jury, you have the ability to look at reason, to let reasonable doubt guide your deliberation, and you have the ability to find that the prosecution had no evidence, because the truth is my client was framed by the flames. Find my client not guilty.
All right. Right in the nick of time, defense. Prosecution, I believe you have about a minute for rebuttal.
Yes, Your Honor. Permission to proceed, Your Honor.
You may.
The fires of their hate set the house ablaze. Members of the jury, the defense has testified to the fact that Bertie Darrow may have burned down her own home because she was in debt. But the moment her house burned down, Darrow couldn't believe it. It was the house she inherited from her dear Aunt Lucia. She couldn't believe that the one thing she had left of her dear aunt was now gone forever. The house meant too much to Miss Darrow that she passed off every single opportunity she had to sell the house, because the market value of the house meant nothing compared to its value to Miss Darrow. Members of the jury, 3 years ago, Jimmie Tanks made a promise, and 3 years later, she fulfilled it. One last thing, if you look at the court today, there is one pivotal person that's not in the courtroom today, and that person is the defendant, Jimmie Tanks, because the fires of his hate set the house ablaze. Find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Before Judge Simon is going to take it away with the judges, each of them saying the thing they liked most from the prosecution, the thing they most liked from the defense, I'd like to hear from the officers of the court. Prosecution timer, if you would please state appearances.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Liu, and I was the prosecution's timekeeper for this trial.
Defense timekeeper.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Crystal Dang, and I was the defense's tech and timekeeper for today.
Thank you so much to both officers of the court. It could not happen without you. Judge Simon and all the other judges, back to you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Timekeepers, good job, good job, good job, good job. If I could get my co-judges, please turn on their camera. All right, so I'm gonna go by the order you all on my screen. We're gonna give one comment to the prosecution and one to the defense. First person is Mr. Jordan Katz.
Hi again, y'all. Just want to start by saying that was a very high level round on all fronts. So congratulations on a really, really good semifinal. For prosecution, I would say the thing I liked most was holistically, I thought your theory was very clear. That's very hard to do with complicated cases like this when there's experts testifying, both ways. It was very clear what you were alleging, who the people were, generally what you thought was going on. So I appreciated that. Defense, I thought in general, your cross-examinations were the best parts of your cases. Just very responsive, very rhetoric heavy. And there was one line, I believe, on the cross of the prosecution expert. I wrote it down because it was just so good. I'm not focusing on the probable cause, I'm focusing on the proof. I just had to shout that out because that's such a good line. But really, really great trial from everybody involved. Thank you for letting me judge.
All right, Judge Miles.
Well, just first of all, again, that was an amazing round. Thank you all for letting me witness that. I've got some specific stuff in the ballots, but one thing that I thought the prosecution did well overall was characterization of the defendant. Because the defense didn't call the defendant, you pretty much had free reign to do whatever you wanted, to use your witnesses to characterize the defendant and paint them in whatever light you wanted. I thought that was done very well. As for the defense, I thought that one of the shining moments for me was just the expert in general. A lot of times in mock trial, experts can be either boring or too confusing for the jury or the judges to really understand. But I thought that the way that the way that the witness handled himself on cross was very clear. I was never confused, and I thought that was a really good picture of what a good expert can be.
All right, Judge Joseph Lee.
Yeah, really commendable round overall. I think both teams were really strong for the prosecution, and I think this just goes in general that the case theory held a lot of weight in this round specifically, where the performative aspects were more like deadlocked in. And so with the case theory, I really liked how the prosecution kind of zeroed in on that target. Of how it wasn't it wasn't really their witness and all that stuff, and it was really easy for it to follow for defense. One of the highlights was that I really liked how you took advantage of the virtual well, especially with like the demonstratives and the annotations you made on the exhibits. I just think that kind of is what elevates your case like to a different level, especially when you're taking advantage of the resources you have, given that it's a Zoom environment. But good job to both teams overall.
Judge Joshua Zane.
Yeah, I resonate everything everyone before me has said. I think this was generally a very great round. I do think that piece theory was good in that it did essentially, I think, effectively mitigate some of the defense biases and maybe the defense advantages. I don't think I saw any in this round. And I think of how balanced and how well-rounded both sides their theories were. I think for prosecution, one thing I really enjoyed was the chemistry between the attorneys and the witnesses. I think it was a good report building. I think it really allowed for the witnesses to really just give their testimony in a less scripted way. On the other hand, for defense, I also think the cross examinations were the thing that were really hitting. It's partially because of the burden, because you just need to raise reasonable doubt. But I felt like when I was listening to both crosses, those reasonable doubts were the things that I was focusing on, and I felt like both crosses did that relatively pretty effectively. Both sides that I think are wonderful, and I think how close the ballots will be will probably reflecting that as well. Just a little bit of prediction on that end. But yeah, thank you all.
All right. Judge Tom Wayne.
Hi, I'm having some internet issue. Can you hear me okay? Can you
A
hear me?
little bit of connection issue, but you're good now.
Okay, sorry about that. Really good job to everyone. One shout out for each side. On the prosecution, the that on the examination, and you maintain that energy on cross-examination. You will not overly feel very. On defense, I really like the second cross-examination. Actually, how you use Future's analogy on direct analogy. I thought that was in advance, so I really appreciate on the fly. But really good job. Sorry if I'm cutting out.
So, Judge Tom Wing, we heard a good amount of what you said. If you want to put it on the chat, I can read it as well, just so they could get the benefit of your feedback. But I'll say what I think my favorite parts were. I think for prosecution, that direct of Bertie Darrow and that burn mark out of nowhere, that was I think you look for moments, mic drop moments, and ways to show it. I always tell people it's always better to show it than to tell it. It's even best to demonstrate it. While you couldn't just put yourself on fire, that would be bad, but you showed it, and that was phenomenal. So I thought that was really, really good. I thought the defense tried to kind of take away from that moment and objected some kind of not an objection that I think would work, but I really like that you all did that. I've seen that maybe 8 rounds of this competition plus coaching this competition myself, and I don't think I've seen somebody actually put burn mark or red mark on themselves to demonstrate it. I thought that was phenomenal. The cross for the defense, a lot of people have mentioned it. I'll also mention it. That was good. I'll also say that closing, especially your pocket on defense of that reasonable doubt standard, because you bring back the probable cause again, right? They don't have to prove it by probable cause, clear and convincing evidence, highly likely, but beyond. So I thought kind of bringing that around would also a full circle moment, especially since we had the conversation as part of that objection. So all in all, good, phenomenal round. Best of luck to whoever ends up facing the winner on the other semifinal round. And it was an honor judging you guys. And if you had any problems with my rulings, you can appeal me. I think, undefeated in the appellate court, so do your worst.
All right, folks, we have the ballots in. Let's get cameras on. Thank you so much for this inspirational and very exciting round. We're going to begin by inspiring all of the watchers, both present and future. Can I get any seniors? Please raise your hand. Can I get any juniors to please raise your hand? Can I get some sophomores? Freshmen? Eighth graders? Congratulations to everybody on a round well fought. Let's move on to most valuable players. With 5 out of 6 votes for the most valuable attorney in this round, congratulations to the defense's Jia-Chen Cho. A split decision for the most valuable witness in this round. With 2 votes, the prosecution's Miss Grace Lee. And with 4 votes, your most valuable witness, The defense's Mr. Ethan Bai. In the first semifinal round, the advancing team represented the Prosecution. In this semifinal round, advancing to the final, top 2 out of 40 teams, congratulations to the defense, Team Pursuit. Well fought for everyone, a whole lot to be proud of. We'll see you in the final.